distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Welcome back to the Make It Plain podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you are watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. Do all the things. Always happy for the support, etc., etc. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, I'm actually recording on Father's Day. It is Father's Day. I'm sitting at home, having not been that looked after by my kids, but that's what happens, right? Daddies don't, fathers, they don't always get the recognition, but it's okay. We move. If you are a father out there, happy Father's Day. This is belated Father's Day to all the fathers out there. I actually got a card from my daughter. It was a couple of Father's Day ago. It's the best card I ever had. If you are watching, you can see this. If you are listening, you're not going to be able to see the card that I'm holding up. But it is a picture of Liam Neeson in that film Taken, with the line "taken for granted," with him putting out the bins. Oh my days, that is how many of us will feel today. Anyway, I am kind of joking. My kids actually are looking after me. I hope if you have children, if you are a father, your kids have been looking after you, partner looking after you. Yeah, it's all good. Belated happy Father's Day to all of the fathers out there. Just a quick aside to that, black men, fathers, all the stereotypes going to tell you we're not there, but that's not the truth. All the studies will tell you black fathers are the most likely to be involved in their children's lives. So, fuck the stereotypes, celebrate black fathers, etc., etc. Anyway, so Father's Day today. So I'm actually going to pick. We're doing a special series, What Will Malcolm Say, where we're using the full interviews from the documentary. Do check out the documentary. And Nobody Can Give You Freedom that we made 100 years since Malcolm's birth, 60 years since his death. Where, if you've been watching this series so far, we filmed the doc in Birmingham, in London, and went over to New York. So far, we started off with the full interview with Dr. Alicia Shabazz, Malcolm's third daughter. Then we did George the Poet last week. Because it is Father's Day, it makes perfect sense. Interviewed both of my parents for the documentary. Carol Andrews, my mom, and Maurice Andrews, my dad. Both heavily involved in British Black Power. British Black Power, massively overlooked part of history in the UK. In fact, Harambee Organisation of Black Unity, Harambee, that funds the podcast, funds Make It Plain. We are the editorial wing of Harambee OBU. Harambee's, my parents started back in the 70s, did free legal advice, did Marcus Garvey Nursery, there was a bookshop, Harriet Tubman Bookshop, there was a legal advice centre, there was a Harambee House Hostel, which is still there. Just did the British Black Power was a huge mobilization, massively influenced by Malcolm's work, which is why I interviewed my parents. So my parents are kind of the stars of the show. If you've seen the documentary, you'll see my mom and dad really did just bring a lot to it. So I'm really glad I got a chance to sit down with them. I would always also recommend that you do try and catch up with your parents, sit down with your parents, get it on interview, record it, because so much of our history just is going to be lost, right? Like, it ain't in books, it ain't written down, no one's taking the time to study it. So one of the projects we definitely are going to do at some point when I get a chance to sit down and arrange it properly is just get you to record your parents, grandparents, send that audio in. We'll get it transcribed and get it kept, right? Because oral tradition, oral history is powerful, but one of the problems with it is that you lose it. And there's a whole lot of history we're just going to lose, and I've already lost, to be honest. People have passed away, people have ill, people can't communicate no more, people. So we've lost a lot already. So it was really great for me to sit down with my parents. So that's the interview we're going to show after the break. The full interview, I sat down in the Marcus Garvey Centre, the Nicole Andrews Community Library. I sat down with both my parents and we chopped it up about Malcolm's influence, British Black Power, them growing up as well. Mom and dad had very different upbringings. My mom was actually born in the UK. Her mom's English, from Manchester. Her dad's from Jamaica. So she was in the UK. There were almost no black people in the UK when my mom was born. And then my dad came over in Windrush generation from Jamaica. So two different stories, right? So really interesting contrast. Anyway, like I said, you can have the whole interview after the break. Carol Andrews, Maurice Andrews, that's and Father's Day seems like the perfect time to run that particular episode. So please do watch the interview, because there's a lot of stuff in there. Obviously, in the doc, you can't keep everything. So there's a lot of stuff in there that wasn't in there. And even, to be fair, I'm planning to do something more extensive with both my parents, trying to get that history, get that documented so we have it, right? So it's really, really important that we do have that stuff, recognize it. What does that mean, etc., etc., etc. So please do check it out. That's after the break. Before that, this is going to be a relatively brief one because, like I said, I've been trying to do what would Malcolm say? What would Malcolm say about what's happening in the world? And haven't really spoke about Malcolm and Palestine, all right? Because I've been off for a bit. And then obviously we've seen now Israel attacking Iran, Iran attacking back, gangsters saying, look, going on social media saying, look, we didn't start it. Whole thing is kicking off, right? And this, when the question you have to ask here is why and what is going on. And again, if you need someone to understand it, like in most things, Malcolm will explain things the best, right? So one of the things to think about Malcolm is, Malcolm X is black radical politics. I wrote the book, Nobody Can Give You Freedom. Whole thing is, look, what is black radical politics? What does that mean, right? And that is us, black people, coming together, organization, Afro-American unity, Rambio, OBU, building something black. And that's really, 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 really important. But, and especially now, because now, many, we'll get into the especially now. But when you do that, that doesn't mean you lose sight of other things in the world, right? There is oppression that's happening to us, but that oppression is part of white supremacy. And white supremacy doesn't just happen to us, right? White supremacy is a global system. And so when we're thinking about allies, who are our allies? Our allies are other oppressed people, right? Forget the white ally nonsense. Forget that. That's not your ally. Allies are other oppressed people, right? Now, so that means that if you're seriously saying, look, how do we understand the world through Malcolm lens? Malcolm tell you this system can no more provide freedom, justice, and equality for black people than a chicken can lay a duck egg, right? Not meant to do it. You understand that. Then you also understand what's happening around the world, colonialism. So Malcolm was someone who felt deeply and thought deeply about Palestine. Malcolm visited Gaza for 2 days in 1964, right? Saw what was happening. Malcolm mentioned and talked about Palestine multiple times in his speeches, his speech in Cairo, his speech in Detroit, and his speech. He wrote a piece about Zionist logic, right, around Palestine. So this is something that was on his mind. And said, look, we need a free Palestine. One of the things he said. Right. Also said in the Zionist logic piece, you can find this piece online. You go Malcolm X Zionist logic, where he says, look, Israel has no justification to take the land of the Palestinians. No justification whatsoever. Right. It says actually this is a colonial situation. This is colonialism. This is what colonialism is all about, right? Europeans, white people go to parts of the world and colonize them. Right, and use them for resource, etc., etc., etc. And Zionism is not separate. Zionism is not separate from racism. Zionism is not separate from white supremacy. Zionism is not separate from all of the other colonial expansionary ideas. You can't separate Zionism from white supremacy. It's connected, right? So when you look at what's happening there, you have to tie it to everything else, right? And that's important, right? So this is why I say Palestine is a black issue. Because it's an issue of white supremacy. The same logic you're seeing in Palestine, the same logic you see the person does in Congo. Or here. It's white supremacy. Now, that doesn't mean it's all the same all the time. That doesn't mean anti-blackness isn't a real feature of society. That doesn't mean any of that. But it means that what's happening is a colonial situation. And any colonial situation is a situation which we should have time for, right? Which is understand is a black issue. Really, really important. Malcolm said this. This is why Malcolm spoke about Palestine. So Malcolm repped Palestine. This is why Malcolm went to Gaza. This is Malcolm understood those connections. Those connections are really, 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 really important, right? Now, also, if you understand it like that, then you understand that what's happening there. And I did this in the New Age of Empire, right? So New Age of Empire, the book I wrote a couple of years ago, had this whole bit on Israel-Palestine, heavily influenced by Malcolm's work, right? It says, look, white supremacy, what's the logic of this? What you have there is you have in Israel, it's settler colonialism. That's the logic, settler colonial logic that we've seen around the world. Now, really importantly, Jewish people are now white. Now, this is number one thing to get into your head. Malcolm had told you this. In fact, Nobody Can Give You Freedom in the book have this whole section in there where Malcolm's saying, look, Malcolm's accused of anti-Semitism because he talks about Jews a lot. But if you look at what he's saying, he's reminding you that Jewish people are white people because we got this confused. In the Holocaust, Jews were turned into non-white. They would say, look, we are not human, subhuman. Anti-Semitism got to the peak of it, which says you're no longer white, you're subhuman, and we're going to get rid of you and kill you, right? That was then. But the reaction to the Holocaust was to fully embrace Jewish people as being white. That's what happens. They come into the fold. You come into the fold of whiteness. You are now protected. We'll give you your place in give you Israel. Which, remember, the Zionists wanted Israel for before then. We granted the land, but weren't really given the support before then. And it's only really the Holocaust afterwards, and they're saying, "Well, look, we've got to do something with Jews. What do we do with them? Israel." Right? That's actually, it's the Holocaust that embraces. They become embraced as white, and then are put into Israel, and all the whiteness and white supremacy logic then goes to support the Israeli state, which is about occupation, which is about taking land from brown people. Again, we've seen this in Australia, seen this in Latin America, seen this in North America, seen this in Africa. That's a logic of white supremacy. We have something we want to do for white people. We're going to come and take your land, kill you, murder you. You go move on. This is for us. And to defend that, and then defend. That's what you're seeing in Israel. That's why the West are always there supporting it. Right? So Malcolm's always trying to remind you, Jewish people are now white. Heavily white. White in the same way that white. Right? So when you see it in Israel, it's whiteness. Also, and this is why you see the psychosis, right? Doesn't always make sense to defend Israel. Would be easier to not defend Israel in many ways, but they'll still do it because they're defending whiteness. But it's settler colonialism. And the logic of settler colonialism is the logic of erasure. You have to get rid of the natives. The natives can't really be there. As long as the natives are there, you have an existential threat. And remember, Israel in particular is surrounded by, look at Iran, surrounded by hostile countries that don't like them because of what they did, right? Not don't like them because they're Jewish, don't like them because they came in and occupied the land. And so there's the reason that Israel keeps doing what it is doing, right? The reason that Israel doesn't want a two-state solution. The reason that Israel has blocked and just continues in this in a crazy way is that it's always an existential threat. Now, in the old style of colonialism, they just would have killed everybody. Long time. Like the genocide you'll see, they would have done that and we would have moved on and we'd have forgotten, the world would have forgotten about it because that's what settler colonialism does. But in this new age of empire, Malcolm calls benevolent colonialism, Israel's dynasty can't just kill everybody, right? Although it's doing a good job of killing lots of people in Gaza and literally pushing everybody out. But it has to pretend to be benevolent, right? And the West has to pretend to be benevolent. They can't just accept anything. There has to be some kind of boundaries, borders around it, right? Which is why you get stuck in this stalemate where Israel wants to get rid, but they can't. And the Palestinians are kind of just trapped, right? And what you'll see, and unfortunately with this logic, is the West will probably at some point either have to really support Israel, as to continue to support, or withdraw support. And then the Arab countries, that's what it is, right? And but it will be interesting to see. And I think the thing that is scary about this is, in reality, America supported Israel kind of not late, but it was really the 60s when they saw having Israel in the region was good to. It's a nuclear power. It's hard power, right? Remember, benevolent colonialism, neocolonialism is about soft power, but Israel's hard power. It's old school hard power, right in the region, which is really important in terms of resources, in terms of oil, etc., etc. All right, now we will shortly be moving away from the oil economy. Right, next 50, 60, 100 years, oil is going to be less dominant, it becomes less important. All right, there is a question of at what point do you stop supporting Israel where it doesn't make any sense anymore? Like, do we want to have a third world war? Does really want to have a third world war, drawing into the whole region, having this war around Israel? I don't know. Logically, it makes no sense. So you'd think at some point this will lead to the West stepping back. But the problem, psychosis. Whiteness is a psychosis. And so this is why I just think they'll keep supporting Israel to the bitter end. And it could end really badly, because if we go all the way to the end, this could actually be all the way to the end. And so that'll be the question that happens when you talk about Israel-Palestine. But the key thing is, and again, why is it a black issue? If the West continues to just support Israeli aggression, which is always going to be aggression, it's not going to back down. You've seen what they've done with Iran. It's not going to back down. That will pulls us all into a conflict that none of us want, right? That's not just a black, it's a global issue, a conflict that nobody wants, right? White supremacy is going to destroy the world. Let's put it that way. If we don't end white supremacy, the whole world is going to be destroyed. That's the actual logic of the West, is the end of the world. In a very real way, not in like a theoretical, Afro-pessimism, the end of the world, where in an actual, the end of the world. So it's incumbent upon us to come together, right? Like when we see those struggles. So this is what, again, drawing on Malcolm, saying what would Malcolm say? Malcolm would say, look, we have to be on the side of the Palestinians. Yes, we have to be building organization so that we can be on the side. And this is where, so this is where it's about what do we do, where are we going, right? So look, we have to be on the side of the Palestinians. What does that mean from a black radical perspective? Look, rhetorically, yes. And you'll hear me talk all the time. Palestine, obviously, this and that, etc. Rhetorically, yes. Put your voice out there, yes, etc. But it's kind of, as black people, that's kind of meaningless. And this is where black Oz, black power, black come together and global struggle are united. Because imagine, what was Malcolm trying to build? Organization of Afro-American unity. An organization linked together organically, politically, strategically, black people in the West with black people on the African continent. They had an organization with us in it that had money, that had resources, that had organizational capacity that could bring us together. Now imagine if that organization existed. How much power that would have for us, and then how much power that would have on the Palestine issue or on any other issue, right? Because right now, as a black person, all I can do is I can just talk about it and say, look, there you go, we support. But there's no actual support because we can't support ourselves. So these actually two things are not distinct. They're the same thing. We often talk about, are we going to support other groups? Are we going to support ourselves? It's not distinct. It's the same. Support ourselves, build capacity within ourselves. And then we can actually have influence on these things. Because right now, as a black person, you ain't got no influence on nothing. All you're doing is talking about anything. All I'm doing is talking. Because we haven't built what we need. So that'll be Malcolm's message. And that's what we're trying to do with the Rambi Organization of Black Unity. Build an organization that has chapters in the black world, across the African continent, that comes together, that organizes, that has a collective power. And then we can use that power on the African continent, but also for our natural allies against colonialism. Malcolm never gave up on the third world struggle, never gave up on what he called dark mankind coming together to oppose white supremacy, never gave up on that. And also prioritize saying, look, we have to organize as black people. The two things aren't complicated. They're not separate. They're the same thing. And so the idea that we shouldn't care, that's not our problem, that's not our fight. No, if you understand this properly, you understand it is our problem. You understand that, yeah, there's many people. You're talking about supporting Arab world, so much anti-blackness. That's not a simple thing to say, oh yeah, let's all jump together with the Arabs. No, of course not, because we know the Arab slave trade. We know the deeply anti-black racism. We know that. That's 100% true. But that doesn't mean you can't work and build. So what Malcolm said about this should be very clear. Yes, we black. Yes, it's black organization, but Palestine is a black issue, an issue we have to lend support to. We have to build ourselves into something that we can lend support, a real, genuine support. It's all our issue, but how do we move forward together? We have to build organizations. So please, again, do www.blackunity.org.uk. Make it plain, subscribe, like. This is what we're trying to do. Early days, Convention of African People next year, trying to bring us together to create that. But without organization, we have no representation. We have no power. And that's where we need to start. And that's what we need to build. And that's what we're trying to do today. And that's the whole point of a documentary, this series, of this work, is to carry on the true legacy of Malcolm X. All right, so after the break, we're going to have both my parents, Carol Andrews, Maurice Andrews, the full interview from Nobody Can Give You Freedom. Do check out the full film. It is there on the Make It Plain channel. So if you're on YouTube, you can just click on Make It Plain. And you can watch it all there for free. Please do tap in. Thank you again for listening, watching, etc., etc., etc. And remember, revolution knows no compromise. All right, so I really wanted people to understand just why Malcolm is not just for America, but for the whole world. And I think sometimes people misunderstand what racism was like in Britain now and historically. And so I could think of two better people to talk to about Malcolm's influence in the UK. And I really wanted to go back and try to understand. Malcolm comes in 1965 and try to see what was racism like, what was it like being in the UK at that time. And both of you have very different experiences. So Dad being born in Jamaica and moving over here, and Mom, you were actually born pre-Windrush in the UK, right? So when you were growing up, it would have been very different. There'd been very few black people. Your dad's from Jamaica, mum's from Manchester. So what was that like growing up in the UK back then?
Well, of course, it's a long time ago. I was born in 1948, so grew up in the 50s and 60s. And we were sort of a novelty, would be the best way to describe it. We lived in Wythenshawe, part of Manchester, and I think we were only one of 2 black families at the time. And the other family lived quite far away. But we grew up knowing that when my parents decided to get married, my grandmother literally threw all my mother's belongings into the street, refused to speak to her, and only sort of mellowed when my older brother was born. So we were always aware of this racism in the family, as it were, which conflicted with the fact that personally I had a really good relationship with my grandfather, who had not agreed with what my grandmother did, but felt helpless in terms of dealing with it. But through school, again, there was just the 2 black families. We were, again, a novelty. We didn't have problems in school. But obviously we were aware of what was going on, and as we became older, when I was like 12, 13, the civil rights movement in the States caught my imagination completely. I became immersed in that and sort of rebelled against the things that we'd grown up with, which was, one was clear. I was one of 3, so I had 3 other sisters. When you get to 10, my dad would tell me, you can have your hair straightened. And this
like it was a prize.
Well, this was a prize. You had to reach 10 and then you could have your hair straightened. And myself and each of my 3 sisters went through this. Obviously, further down the line at 14, 15, sort of resented that they ever had that done. And subsequently, it did cause a rift in the family in the sense that I was the oldest girl and I was breaking away from this sort of background that, yes, you need to fit in, you need to blend in, and you need to be as white as possible. Bear in mind, we were a mixed race family anyway. So with that sort of conflict within the family came to a head. But in terms of external racism, I would say, short of verbal abuse, which was commonplace.
When you say verbal abuse, what do you mean?
You would call nigger. If you walked to the shops, somebody would be there to call you a nigger. Commonly, you were told to go back home. On buses, people would not want to sit with you. My mum got challenged when she was sat with us, why are you sitting with those niggers, that sort of thing. That was just commonplace growing up. But in terms of sort of moving forward, it's when I went to university that it sort of impacted on me personally a lot more, because I found that I was being treated as an overseas student when in fact I wasn't. And in those days, possibly even now, there were quotas in terms of what they would provide for overseas students. So for instance, getting into halls of residence, I never managed to do at university. I did challenge them. It was never really resolved in my time at university, but subsequently it was, I understand. And I remember a particular occasion in a lecture where I had a tutor who was quite right-wing, and in a particular seminar, when I was with about 4 other students, he sort of went off text and started talking about the Nazis in a very sort of complimentary way. And I was just incensed and challenged him. And he stood up, stared at me and walked out of the room, just marched out. I raised it straight away with the deputy head of the department because I knew that I could be in serious trouble otherwise. And he was very defensive, but basically said the guy was having some kind of a breakdown. I never had him as a tutor again. But then a couple of years later, when I'd graduated and started my first job, when I went for the interview, the chair of the interview panel said he had to comment on a reference I had from the university. It was the best reference he'd ever read. And it was from this person I reported my tutor too, who obviously felt he owed me big time.
Okay.
I didn't deserve the reference, but it was totally
You
glowing.
made an impression.
Made a total impression on him. So that was sort of the backdrop, but always becoming aware along the way that we were black. When Afro became the thing, mine was like out here, much to the horror of my father. And the impact of moving forward, especially from influences from America, was tremendous.
Yeah. So you were treated as an overseas student?
Yeah.
Because that would have been the assumption at the time. Dad, you were overseas, actually born in Jamaica, moved over to the UK when you were 13. What was that experience like?
Well, it's an interesting experience, really. But the point is that my parents came in order to make better for themselves. The problem when I arrived was I came straight into Handsworth, and by that time they had purchased their own property. But in the community, you could see the deprivation. So I'm coming from a depressed colony, and I come into Birmingham, and I'm witnessing depression that I didn't expect. So for example, a young couple next door, white of course, they were permanently dirty. The kids were underfed. The house was a shambles, right? And so coming from the colony where Britain and white people are so great and fantastic people to us, we have to bow and scrape to them. And living next door to this dirty couple, and they were nice people. We got on quite well with them because we felt for them. And that's an unusual thing because we came here poor, and we felt sorry for them. You know, it's crazy. So that was a kind of backdrop in which we came. But then you got to understand, our parents, they were focused on survival. And they knew what it meant to survive because they were hill people who worked for themselves, feed themselves, lived their own lives without directions. And they were aware that you could fall into poverty and you become destitute like the people next door. So they were anxious to work night and day just to keep us going and to keep us in line. So we as children spent a great deal of time at home. We had little recreation.
Okay.
The local community, well, they had little recognition themselves.
When you say you're at home, what was the house like? Like, who was in the house when you moved in?
Well, here's the thing that we tend to forget and people don't understand. My stepfather would explain that when he was working in IMI, in Witten, right? He slept in the bed at night, and his friend slept in the bed during the day. They had we worked night, father worked day. So my parents bought the house in order for somewhere to live and to help other Jamaicans and black people generally to find somewhere to live. So when you say what the house is like, if you imagine, it's a villa house, and it had 3 floors, 2 floors, two rooms on the ground floor, 2 rooms on the middle floor, 3 rooms on the middle floor, and 2 attics. And when they came, the toilet was outside. There was no bath. So they converted one of the rooms upstairs into a bathroom toilet. And every room in that house was occupied by a different family.
Really?
You know, my parents lived on the first floor with the 2 children, me and my sister. You know, and in every room there was a couple. And upstairs, I lived upstairs, one of the attic, and there was another male in the other attic, so it was overcrowded, you know. And generally, the explanation was they simply could not find accommodation. They had to buy their own in order to help themselves and to help the other people. And dotted around Handsworth at that time were black people coming in the same way and making the effort in the same way to survive. So by, I think, 1971, there was a survey which shows that in Handsworth, 57% of black people own their own houses because they had gone through such a terrible time without accommodation, living on top of each other, you know, that they were so anxious to set themselves up, and they did. The Woodwood generation, as they now call them, you know, were the bricks. Without them, we wouldn't have made it. We wouldn't have survived. But they were determined to make a success of their sojourn into the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
A lot of them wanted to go back, but low wages, bad housing, children, they had to put whatever they earned into the family. They couldn't save to go back. They were more saving to bring the children in, to bring their sisters and brothers in, and so on and so forth. So it was a very active period for us.
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about, we both had different experiences, obviously. Racism is certainly part of that, and went into activist roots in different ways too. So Mum, you were one of the first people, I guess, to work for the Racial Relations Board after the Racial Relations Act. Just explain what was why did they need to have, why was it necessary to have a Racial Relations Board, and what kind of work were you doing?
Well, in terms of access to just generally going in shops, going to a club, going in a pub, whatever, there was blatant discrimination against people. Hence the 1965 Act, and then subsequently, to try and challenge what was going on and to put something in place to deal with the issue. In those days, it was like commonplace to see signs up, no niggers, no Irish, that sort of thing. Getting accommodation, as Maurice was saying, was really difficult. People were openly racist. So it was really, and of course by then, there were more and more people coming in to fill jobs from the Caribbean and also from Asia. So the problem was becoming to the point where the government couldn't ignore it any longer. Hence the sort of softly approach. Let's put in place a board, start tackling this issue, trying to get the parties to agree. Court's the last resort, that sort of approach, hence conciliation. So that was the backdrop. It was my first job on leaving university. And to be honest, I was attracted to it because it gave you a chance to sort of confront what was happening, but in an official capacity where you were asking the questions, you were doing the challenging, which is why I wanted to join.
Okay. And what were some of the things you had to do?
The very first thing I had to do when I was training, I was based in Manchester briefly to train, was to visit a publican who had blatantly said he wasn't having any Asian people in his pub. It was actually near Moss Side where he was based. So I went along by appointment in terms of he was told I was coming to see him. I was just 21 at the time. He wouldn't open the door. I could hear an Alsatian dog barking and he kept threatening to let it loose if I didn't move. So the whole interview was conducted with me shouting up to him in an upstairs window. So it was quite challenging. But to be honest, I quite enjoyed it because everything he said, which had countered, told him what the law said, what he had to do. If he didn't, then there were consequences. But the whole conversation, as I said, was me shouting up from the road, from the path, and him in his window and this dog barking away in the background. Once I was fully trained, I moved to Nottingham briefly and then came to Birmingham as a conciliation officer, and we did a lot of work around clubs, which unfortunately is still an issue for black people. But I did quite a lot of work around that, and we did take certain people to court, which was very satisfying. There were consequences if you ended up in court. There were injunctions, there were fines, etc. So that was a big area. Legal services was another one, where solicitors were not willing to instruct black barristers. I remember a particular case where I had an interview with a very upstanding solicitor in Birmingham with a good reputation. And he was just not using a particular black barrister. And it was a very rewarding interview, because he basically thought black people weren't up to the job. And it became clearer and clearer from his answers in the interview. That's what he felt. And that he was in difficulty with it. So there's a variety of things in those early days before the law was strengthened, challenging and occasionally taking people to court.
Yeah. So the time government they have the racial relations board, they're having this, trying to get people to bring in fines, injunctions, etc.
Yeah.
And you also had grassroots mobilizations, and in Handsworth in Birmingham, where you grew up, and it's obviously largely where black people lived in the city. How did the resistance start, if you like it? Or how did that emerge? How did the roots of this organization around you come about?
Well, that is a good question. But what you got to understand is that from the first day we step out into the street, having come here in the 60s, it was on Birchfield Road, went to a shop to buy sweets. Woman refused pint blanc to serve us, right? And no amount of protests would she serve us. Recently, I met a young lady who told me that she had the same experience with a woman, and they used to stand outside her shop and curse her, right? But then, from there, we went to Birchfield. I went to Birchfield Secondary School, right? And of course, we are country people, very proud Jamaicans, right? And there was a saying we had amongst ourselves, which says, "Call me any name, but don't touch the body." And that was a motto for Jamaicans. So anyone who touched us, there was a fight, right? Yeah. But in school it became worse because people was calling us names. So that led to umpteen fights and challenges in the playground. And in my case, it led to challenging a teacher who had actually supported someone who I was having the better of in one of these clashes. And I had to curse him. So I ended up before the headmaster. The headmaster was a nice guy. He looked at my record and says, "Yeah, go on. Go back to class." He was a good guy, right? But that showed that just the microscopic of what was going on outside. I mean, I'm at school. My parents, I'm closeted at home. I'm not seeing the full picture at that time. But outside, there was real problem. The skinheads were around, and stuff. In Semitic, where Malcolm X came, and that was a hotbed of racism, especially in housing, because if you have to know Semitic. Semitic is the Victorian working class community. Little houses, small, squashed up in streets, hardly room to move. And they wouldn't give black people accommodation of any kind in Semitic. It was a struggle. And then, I can't remember the name of the guy, but he's the pre-runner to Enoch Powell. A guy called Griffiths, actually. Called Griffiths, right? So he picked up on the wave of the resentment of people in Semitic against black people. So we had to hear all that because we didn't experience it in Handsworth because there's so many Jamaicans in Handsworth. The skinheads threatened to come in, but they wouldn't dare.
Just like that, like with the racist rights we just had. Lots
Right.
of threats to come, but no one actually comes.
Well, exactly. Yes. So there was a lot of that. Manchester United supporters would come to the Hawthorns and say they're coming down to Handsworth. We haven't seen any yet. You know, that kind of stuff. So we were isolated to some extent because we were Jamaicans in Handsworth. Yeah, and we had a reputation. But the main problem we had was not with local people in around Handsworth, was with the police, the state. And I think you made the distinction previously about the difference between prejudice and racism. The kids at school who called me a nigger, they were prejudiced. The woman who denied me sweets, she was a racist because she was denying me essential service. People who were denying me housing were racist, right? But there was a lot of prejudice, yeah? And you had to put up with the petty prejudices, and we did. And we overcome them, we challenged them. And so I left school in '63, and by '66, the position was such that one began to feel the full width of what was going on, that we decided to start a West Indian study cycle in order to understand who we were and why we were being treated in this way. And that's where the movement you refer to started in Handsworth. So from that meeting, we develop organization to meet the struggles of black people.
What kind of things were you studying in the study cycle?
Well, the first thing is, when you're at school in a white environment, and all the books are white, and you are being taught about the English engineers, James Watts, etc., etc. You've been taught about Marie Curie and people like that. And you never thought about any black people. So, and the books never contained anything related to black people. So we had to go out and find where black people were, what happened to us, why come we are not in the books. So the first step was to identify, and we went out and went to the library, and we couldn't find any black book on the central library in town. But we kept searching, and in one little corner, we found almost every book you can think of on black people, but it was locked away in a little corner. So we started to read and understand what was going on. And that's where Malcolm X came in to us in, you know, being now adult. Malcolm came when I was 18 months out of school. I knew little of his visit. But by the time his autobiography came out and we started reading his autobiography, we began to understand what Malcolm X was about. And the fact that Malcolm X was not just relevant to America. And we could see why he came to England, because the same problem, the degree of the problem is different, but it's the same racism they face. And Malcolm X was quite decisive about his approach, in the sense that he picked it up and he came to England to try and deal with the Semitic situation, which was extremely bad, with Griffiths and the elections, where black people was being, it was a bit like you probably see recently Trump and the Asians. It was similar. Enoch Powell, after Griffith, he saw a river of blood and all kinds of nonsense, you know, occurring. So Malcolm came to challenge that kind of racism. and to make the link between England and the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, Mark, you mentioned also that you said the civil rights literature and that literature at the time was important. And again, I think people underestimate how little literature there was. Like now you can just go to the local online retailer and get any book you want in the next day, whereas before there was very little. So in that was the autobiography of Malcolm X, so that's a book that people talk about a lot. Was that one of those texts that was?
It was. It wasn't the first text. The first exposure was James Baldwin, and his powerful writing, the way he described what was and had happened in the States, was just like an awakening in the sense that obviously I was aware of the civil rights movement and what we all aware of slavery, etc., but the way he wrote about issues struck a huge chord. Yeah. And it was like an opening of realization that, this is what we've got to focus on. Subsequently, yes, Malcolm X's autobiography. Again, direct, clear, passionate guidance in terms of what we're dealing with, who we are, more realization about your own position and the position of people like yourself. It was profound, but as you say, in terms of getting access to books, it's very different then. Extremely different.
Very, very different. Black books you wouldn't see on the shelves, basically. The authors you get were in fact largely Americans. There were a few Caribbean writers, but they wrote and acted in the English fashion, basically. So you didn't get the hard knowledge of who you are and where you were coming from. That was the significant difference. And I think in your case, I can't remember the guy, but you listened to an American singer when you're at university, and you pick up a lot of the happenings in the United States as a result of his...
Richie Havens.
Richie Havens.
Oh yeah, I loved Richie Havens.
Yeah, Richie Havens, yeah. And when she played Richie Havens and I listened to Richie Havens, you even get more understanding of the struggle the Americans were going through and of the struggle of black people generally. So, he was a good influence. Richie Havens.
He was.
Yeah.
So the music, educated, books influence, musical influence.
Yeah.
I think education generally is an underrated part of Black Power movement in Britain.
Right.
I think, but you're sitting in front of the Kehinde Andrews Library. We're trying to carry on that legacy.
Right.
And we are in what was the Marcus Garden Nursery.
Yeah.
And Harambee was founded in early 1970s. And did you meet at Harambee, or was it before Harambee?
No, Maurice has forgotten this, but he met me at my office in the Race Relations Board. He came in with a colleague of his, introduced himself with a false name.
A false name.
And told me about an incident at a local girls' school in Handsworth where the head had some issue with something that had happened involving some black children. But to deal with it, she segregated the school into white and black and dealt with them separately. And at the time you were involved at Leonard Road, Afro-Caribbean Association, and they came in as spokesman for that to get some advice. And I subsequently went to a meeting at Leonard Road to meet the girl and to talk to some other people. And it sort of came from there. That's how we met. But you had totally forgotten that, hadn't you?
Absolutely.
Mr. Brown.
So many things over the years.
Yeah, he'd introduce himself as Mr. Brown.
Right.
Because there was always the fear that I could be a government spy, and therefore you don't give your true identity.
You never be too careful.
Too careful, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Well, Harambee, around that time, briefly after Harambee was founded.
It was sort of like 18 months later, was it? A bit more?
Yeah, a little bit later. You see, organization in Antwerp went through different stages. We started with the Study Cycle, then we started the Afro-Caribbean organization. We organized stuff in the parks for black people, and one of the things we should never forget is the difficulty young people had at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of the people came over. Yes, the men came first, followed by the women. And once people became near settled, they immediately started sending for their children. And quite a few of the children were male children. And the woman may have picked up a man in England, or even if her husband or partner was from Jamaica, for example, and he's not the father of one of the sons. There became a conflict in the home between husband partners and the young boy children that has just been brought into England. The result was they left home, they were sleeping in the park, they were sleeping with friends, and it was a massive problem, you know. And we had to set out to try and see how we could resolve that problem. And we agitated the local authority with the charity trusses, and we set up the Harambee hostel. The building is still in Hampstead Road there, and still functioning as a hostel, but not run by us. But it was a crucial intervention on our part, self-help as it were. We weren't relying on white people to solve our problem. And this is the difference between us and generations after us. We set out to find a way to ameliorate our home problem. And we were fairly successful.
How much was Malcolm X's message and inspiration to that self-help approach?
Well, yes. In fact, I have to say, almost unconsciously, we were doing what Malcolm X was suggesting. And because in his autobiography, there was no program. It's just a description of how he was treated and the struggle of America. But when we later learned about Malcolm coming back from Mecca, and he thought that as black people, we should put religion to one side when we are dealing with our black problems, and we should all come together and seek to solve the problem. And his program, and his ideas that he was going to, when he returned from Mecca, that he was going to implement was very similar, if not more advanced than what we had in mind. But we were on the same line, we were on the same page, you know, so Malcolm was very crucial. But Malcolm was actually more crucial than that, because young people now, or even people of your age, won't really understood unless you study it. The white man had dissect black people in a scientific way. And I don't remember the number, but there were about, it must be about 15 stages of black people. So Carol is mixed race, for example. So you have the quarter caste, the half caste, all kinds of different groups, the mulatto, and so on and so forth. So we were being described in a horrible fashion. The colored man, for example, was another example. And Malcolm X said in typical Malcolm X fashion, we have to stop other people defining who we are. And he says, we are the black man. And that resounded from one corner of the earth to another. So today, the mulatto description, which was the description of the 60s and 70s, early 70s, has disappeared. I have not heard no one called a mulatto in the last 20 to 30 years, for example. So it was crucial in identify who we were and what the problem we face and how we had to deal with it. You know, we saw there was a phase when black children in America was whitening themselves, committing suicide because they were black. No, we still have the people bleaching themselves, but it was nothing as dramatic and harmful as what was happening when we couldn't identify who we are and we didn't stand up for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that was the crucial part of the development of, let's say, black power, not just in Hansel, but in England.
Yeah.
You know, so black is beautiful became not only a phrase, but a lifestyle, basically.
Talking about that lifestyle, actually, you mentioned your dad seemed to think that straight hair was a privilege, and you obviously embraced the afro, very large afro later on. Why was that so important?
In terms of what I did, or it's just reinforcing your own identity, that this is who I am, this is who I want to be, deal with it, sort of thing. I suppose, basically.
Yeah.
And of course it was widespread by then, but you just felt so much better.
You've told me before, because it was an overnight change, right? You went to work with your hair tied up, and
Yeah.
decided to go with it.
Yeah.
One day, what was the reaction like?
Taken aback, I should say. Oh, Carol. But never directly referred to. Because I used to wear my hair sort of tied back. And then I just thought, no, it's full enough now to have an afro. And it was an extremely large afro for a while. But no, it was never openly referred to, but it was sort of looked at askance. And remarks were made, but not directly to my face.
And of course, the afro was an identification issue because, you know, as Jamaicans, the girl with the good hair was the girl without the naughty hair primarily. So it was crucial in terms of our women to understand the beauty of the naughty dread.
Like my employers didn't, as I said, they didn't directly confront me about it, but in terms of going to do investigations, sometimes it was clear, and not only were they faced with a young black woman, but there was all this hair coming as well, that people were taken aback. And I remember one particular case I dealt with where a young Sikh boy had been refused admission to a private school in Birmingham. And it was my case. I went to interview the head. He was visually taken aback that I turned up. I was struggling to get over the fact that I was there at all. We found against him, because it was a blatant, he didn't want Sikhs in his school. And he went as far as the House of Lords in the end. But along the way, in his appeal, he described me as, well, he didn't use the word black, but this woman in jackboots is what he said. I didn't have jackboots, obviously. Who came making demands, and it was ridiculous what he said. And it's only when it got to the higher courts that it was dealt with by the courts, in the sense that they exonerated me from any odd behaviour or whatever. But it's his initial reaction faced with a black person with an afro demanding answers to questions that he didn't want to give because he's guilty, basically. But so that sort of sticks in my mind more than my colleagues or whatever, because he actually used it in his appeals, that he was faced with this terrible person confronting him in this fashion that he totally objected to.
Yeah. But the unapologetic nature of the way you approach him, that's part of Malcolm's message, right?
Yeah.
No compromise.
No compromise. On some things you don't compromise.
Yeah, by any means necessary. That is the way Malcolm X put it.
Yeah. I think I got everything in the interview I needed. I think.
Yeah, about relevance today. We've covered that.
Yeah, actually, let me should do it yesterday. Yeah. So obviously, historically, Malcolm's very important inspiration to even the organisation we're in. But why do you think Malcolm's still relevant today?
You just have to listen to the last American election, haven't you? Yeah. You see, what's happening is that across Europe and across the pond, as they call it, the right wing is on the rise again. And you saw in the Trump election that race was the central issue. The media will tell you it was the economy, but it was black people, black and brown people, Hispanic people, on the borders of America, coming in droves. And Biden had the audacity to let all of them in. And the right wing couldn't put up with that. So although the Americans on the political level think they've made great progress, the fact is that they've made little progress with American racism. But it's just that they don't see the contradictions. Those who are seeking political office doesn't see the contradiction. So Malcolm X is crucial in many ways, especially for the Americans where they are split up into states. Because while the federal government give a picture of America as a glorious place, if you go into the states like Mississippi, that's probably the worst one. Yeah. Virginia and some other states, black people are nowhere near forward. In fact, some of those states, black people are worse than they are in England. Yeah. And I'm not joking, that is real. Yeah. Live under terrible condition. Yeah. One woman was coming, told me I met a woman here, she's here in a program, and she came from Virginia, I think it was, and she says when she reached to a point near Mississippi, she winds up her window and put her foot down. She's not stopping, And that's the kind of condition they still live under. Yeah. And with the right wing on the rise, and we shouldn't be too complacent in England because the American economy owns most of Britain. There isn't a place in Britain that the American economy does not touch. And the fact is, Britain is now becoming the colony of America. So the rise of the right wing in America not so much signal, it follows the pattern of the rise of the right wing in Europe. Yeah? And you should know that black people in England are making far greater progress across the board than black people in any other European country.
Sound like Kimmy better know that?
No, I hope not. I hope not. Yeah. No, this is a reality. The fact is that because the black movement in England stand up against racism and push and push and continue to push, we are making greater progress. Yeah? And the fact is, in today, those of us who got a degree or got a good job, who sit back and think, oh, I'm all right, chum, they are making a mistake.
Yeah.
They are not putting any effort in building up the community and looking at what they can do to what the Americans call those that are left behind.
Yeah.
And the so-called knife gangs of London represent people who have been left behind, and who we as black people who are doing better is not addressing their needs. And their needs are our needs, because when the right wing rise up, we need all of us.
Yeah.
You know, all of us got to answer.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm thinking about that Malcolm versus self-help and the stuff that happened here that we were involved with the, Rambi had the bookshop, the nursery, the hostel, legal advice. Are those things still relevant today?
I think they are. I mean, they're thin on the ground, but if you look at the wider picture, a lot of black people are struggling economically, socially. The situation in schools hasn't improved in terms of the curriculum, the way children are treated. There's still disproportionate numbers of black children falling into the system of suspensions and the rest. It's not a rosy picture. Clearly, there are a lot more black people doing a lot more different things that they would have been doing in the 60s, in positions of power, etc. But the underlying picture, in my view, hasn't really changed. The problems are still there. The inequalities are still there. Malcolm is as relevant today as he ever was, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Well, undoubtedly. You say that one of the problems we do have, and we are blind to it, is, as I say, England is becoming a colony of the America. But the English economy is a problem, because the English economy is taking a battering for the fact that they pulled out of Europe. And that was racism that took them out of Europe, nothing else. And as a result, England is getting poorer. Look at your fuel bill. I come up from Jamaica just before Christmas, and everybody's buttoned down, just to keep warm. They can't afford the fuel bills. Now, what's going to happen in the longer term? We as black people, we are the ones in danger. And we really have to come together and look at these economic reality. We can't simply be dancing our night away and sounding off on social media. We've got to get back to the nitty-gritty, to the community, and build up our communities. It is crucial if we are to survive. And I keep reminding people that this isn't the first time there have been a large number of black people in England. In the Victorian period and before, there were lots of black people in England. What did they do? Like Australia, they whitened them. So by the time you get a couple of centuries, black people are wiped out. And it's the Caribbean, the Windrush migration that bring black people back. Well, look out. The same thing could happen again. Yeah.